Hello and welcome to this playthrough of the first scenario of Albuera. I'm Fred, the designer of the game and the system, and we're going to go through the first few turns of that scenario just to give you an overview of the rules and the important game mechanics of infantry combat. Here you can see the setup for the scenario. Girard's first core elements are at the top of the screen, and we have Zayas and Lardizabal's divisions at the bottom. The markers on the turn and tracks sheet should be placed as you see there, with fatigue for Girard's elements at 2 and the fatigue for the 4th and Vanguard division of the Spanish army at 4. The weather is clear throughout the scenario, so no need to roll on the weather table. And the scenario starts at 10:30 a.m. with initiative to the French. In order to speed up, player will be playing both sides, so nothing happens in the rally phase of the first turn, so we're going to start with the operations phase by looking at the French leader cards and select Girard himself as our first leader for the French. We then turn to the Spanish deck to select one of the Spanish leaders to start the operation phase. In this case, we'll pick Zayas. Now, because Girard's SR number is higher than Zayas, he gets to choose who goes first. In this case, he's going to let Zayas activate first because the French player wants to see if the Spanish player will reposition his units so he can better plan his maneuver. As the active leader, Zayas now is allowed to activate the units under his command. When the CG is activated, you first determine which of the units are out of command. In this case, nobody is. Then you move the leader first, and finally you move the units, making sure that they all stay in command by the end of their activation. In this case, Zayas will stay put. So first we'll choose the battalion of the Walloon Guards to move forward. Battalion is in line, so it's going to cost 1 extra movement factor to enter each hex. So 3 points, 1 for the slope, 1 for the line, 1 for the hex, and then the last 2 points in the second hex. Then we will choose the second Spanish Guards. That unit is in column, as shown by the marker on top of it. So it's going to only cost 1 movement factor for the first hex entered. The road doesn't count because the unit is not in road column. The second hex will cost 2 movement factors because the unit is crossing a slope. And finally, the third hex entered will cost the last 2 movement factor of the unit because it is crossing another slope. Finally, the Toledo regiment will move forward 1 hex and go downhill to line up with the Spanish Guards. And this concludes Zayas' activation, so we put Zayas' card on the activated pile. Because there is still 1 card on the activation stack, the opponent, Spanish player in this case, must select one of his cards to challenge the French leader that is left on the activation stack. The card selected is Lardizabal, but the French player decides not to take the initiative and he lets the Spanish player play first for the same reason we mentioned earlier. So we decide not to move Lardizabal and only to move the 2 units on the left flank to go position themselves behind the Arroyo Seco, so that they can enjoy the TEM modifier in case they get assaulted. Note that the unit on the left is in an extended line. It's got 4 steps. It's a 3-rank line, so it has to have 4 steps to be able to extend. Lardizabal is now done, so it goes to the activated pile. The last card from the Spanish player is Buriel. Buriel is not commanding any unit, he's an aide-de-camp. So he would only come into play in case he needs to replace a casualty. So Girard decides to go before Buriel, and so Buriel's card is placed at the bottom of the activation stack. The French player now decides to use Girard's card ability, which is to activate his subordinates if they are in range. They are all in range, so all the subordinate cards, Varé and Pépin, are put on top of Girard's card on the activation stack. When a player activates multiple leaders, he can select which one goes first and the order of activation of those leaders. So in this case, we'll pick Girard to go first. Because the French player wants to advance and attack the Spanish line, he needs to move Girard closer. And the reason he can do that is that the 5th Corps has another marker that you cannot see here. It is actually placed behind the Spanish line at the bottom of the screen. So Girard has to move towards his objective at least one hex. Now this is a legal move, even though Girard right now is out of command of all his subordinate units. He just needs to have at least one of them within his command range by the end of the CG's activation. Now we'll fast forward through the activation of that command group. Notice that the units in column are changing into line by the end of their movement. Also note that the train unit stays within 3 axes of the artillery so that it can supply it for offensive fire. Varé with his grenadier is now activated. Note that the counter for Girard has a command range of 6, which has been changed now to 5 after rescaling the game. But Varé doesn't need to stay within the command range of the leader. That's just going to affect whether or not it can be activated using the leader card of Girard. So Varé will move forward also towards the objective, but he can take a different route as long as he reduces his distance to the objective by at least 1x. So we'll use a grenadier to try to flank the Spanish line. Finally, Pépin will activate his second division. He will move with the units he is stacked with and set himself up to occupy the left flank of the French formation. Now the French player has one more card left in his hand, that's Gazan, the aide de camp. Gazan has no units to command right now, so he moved stacked with Pépin, so he's considered to have activated already. So he's put on the activated pile. The last card to be played is Buriel. Nothing happens with Buriel, so he goes also to the activate pile, which concludes the operations phase. The next phase is the out of play phase. There are no leaders in the out of play box, so that's skipped. And then we have the assault phase. We have no fixed bayonets markers on any of the units, so that's skipped also. So we turn to the cleanup phase. The leader cards are returned to each player's hand. We have no passive leaders, so we can skip the next segment. No spent infantry. Fatigue has not been increased because there was no combat. Cohesion is not used in the introductory scenario, so we can skip that segment too. There are no completed OMs and no automatic victory, and so the only thing we need to do is advance the minutes marker to the 45 minutes past the hour box. So this is the situation at the beginning of the second turn. There are no actions to be taken during the rally phase, so that phase can be skipped. We can go directly to the operations phase and select the leaders that will start the activation stack. Once again, the French player selects Girard as his first leader, but the Spanish player this time selects Buriel. The French player will let Buriel activate first because he has no units under his command, so he's placed on the activated stack. Girard is still left on the activation pile, so the Spanish player must select another leader. In this case, he selects Zayas. However, the French player wants to activate before Zayas, so he decides to put Girard on top of the stack. Girard will not move this turn. The first unit to move will be the artillery unit that will climb uphill for 2 movement factors and unlimber for another 2 movement factors. The train unit is within 3 axes, so the artillery unit can fire offensively at the unit in column that's 2 axes away from it. The base fire value of the artillery unit is 5, and the only modifier that applies to that shot is the fact that the enemy unit is 2 axes away, so the artillery will use canister and gets a +1. So it has to roll a 6 or less, and so a 2 is enough to cause a TEM check and a straggler's loss. We find a straggler's marker to place on top of the unit and then roll for the TEM check. The roll is an 8, which is above the value of 6 for the guard unit, and so the unit becomes disordered in addition to the stragglers. We then roll for ammunition depletion, that's a 7, so no ammo is expended for this shot. We then move a stack of 2 battalions in column down the hill in order to assault the disordered unit. The stack will switch to a line formation and then move forward and enter the reaction zone of the Spanish Guards. That triggers a reaction from the Spanish player that asks the French player to make a skirmish check for the moving stack. There are no modifiers for the TEM check, as both units have a skirmish value of 2. The unit passes the check, and now the French player can decide whether he wants to fire on the Spanish unit or to assault it. He decides to assault and makes an assault check. He passes the check too, and so the unit is put under a fixed bayonets marker that will be resolved in the upcoming assault phase. Now that the Spanish Guards unit is taken care of, the other French stack can move forward and attempt to assault the disordered stack. Note that the second stack does not have to take a skirmish check because the Spanish Guards unit is targeted by a fixed bayonets marker, which cancels its reaction zone. So the French player is free to make his assault check. That is passed, so the unit is put also under a fixed bayonets marker. We then move the last stack of Girard's units, 2 points to go down the slope. We take a second to check the command range to make sure the unit is still in command after it finishes its move. The unit goes downhill once more, gets a free rotation because it's in column, and changes to line. The French player decides to fire with the unit because an assault would be difficult across the Arroyo Seco. The fire modifier is 0 because although the target is in line, it is currently being enfinated, so the bonus for line does not apply. A 5 or less needs to be rolled to have any effect. Unfortunately, the roll is 7, so no effect for that fire. Girard's CG is now done, so Zayas is left on top of the activation stack. The French player needs to select another leader to put on top of the stack. He selects Pépin. Pépin has a SR of 4, which is the same as Zayas, but because the French have the initiative, they decide whether or not Pépin goes on top of the stack. In this case, the French player decides to let Zayas go first. The Walloon Guards will fire against the stack that is assaulting them. That stack has 4 steps, so you have a modifier of +1 to the base fire value of 5 that the unit has in line, for a total of 6. A 2 is rolled, which results in a straggler's result plus a TEM check. A poor roll of 8 for the French player results in the unit being disordered, in addition to having a stragglers. However, the assault marker is not removed because as soon as you engage in an assault, even if you disorder, you have to complete it. We speed up the end of the activation. There are just a few units moving in the back of the line. The Spanish player selects Lard d'Isabal as the next leader, and the French player declines to activate Pépin, letting Lard d'Isabal activate first. Only 1 infantry unit is moved, and then play passes to the French player because he's the only player with remaining cards in his hand. Gazan will go first to help with the assault. He's going to move to stack with the stack that just disordered. Then Varé will activate and will move his 2 bataillons de grenadiers on the left flank of the Spanish line. The first one crosses the Arroyo Seco and attempts an assault check on the flank of the line. It is successful on a 0, so we place the unit under a fixed bayonets marker. The next unit will move in to support the assault, but unfortunately it fails its check. It does fire, however, and forces the Spanish unit to make a TEM check, and that check is passed. We finish the activation phase with the activation of Pépin's division. After maneuvering the infantry on the right flank of the Spanish line, the artillery and artillery train are set up. Unfortunately, that's a poor roll of 8, followed by another poor roll, which leads the train unit to be flipped to its low ammo side. One more such failed roll, and the train unit will be removed from the game. The operations phase is over. There is no out of play phase, so we move on to the assault phase. We will start from the left side with the Grenadiers assault on the Spanish unit there. That unit must take a receive check with a -2 modifier to its TEM because it's been assaulted through a flank hex. With a modified TEM value of 3, a roll of 5 makes the unit disordered. It doesn't shrink, however, because the assault first needs to be resolved before the unit shrinks. So we have 3 steps attacking a unit with 4 steps. However, the unit is extended, so it can only use half of its strength, 2 steps, and disordered, so that strength is halved again. So that's 3 against 1, so it's going to be the 3-to-1 column. An 8 is rolled, which results in a special result. And when we consult the special result for a close order infantry unit attacking a disordered unit, we get DD, Defender Disorders, which added to the current disorder result, results in the unit being routed. The Spanish infantry performs its retreat and then is placed in the routed units box. The victorious Grenadier Battalion can now advance in the hex vacated by the routing unit. We now move on to the next assault, the one on the far right. The Spanish unit needs to pass a receive check, which it does. And so we compute the odds. The attacking stack is disordered, can only count half of its steps, so that's 2. Defending stack has 3, column is therefore 2 versus 3. With a lucky roll of 1, despite the odds, the French unit manages to disorder the Spanish unit. Now on to the last assault against the disordered unit in the center. Spanish receive check, player rolls a 6, that's not enough to pass the check, and so the unit, being already disordered, retreats in rout. That unit is also placed in a routed units box, and as a final action of the assault phase, the victorious French unit advances into the vacated hex. And so at the beginning of the cleanup phase, the turn and tracks sheet looks like this, with both fatigue markers for the Spanish divisions in the +1 box, and the markers for the French Grenadier and the French 1st Division also in the +1 box. Those 4 CGs have had units that were involved in fire combat or assault, and that's why the fatigue markers were moved to the +1 boxes. The leader cards are returned to each player's hands. There are no passive leaders to be flipped, no spent infantry to recover readiness, so the fatigue can be adjusted by moving those 4 markers to the next fatigue box. The final step is then to move the hours and minutes markers to the next turn, which is going to be the 11 o'clock turn. So that is the situation on the board after 2 turns. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again for the completion of this scenario. Bye-bye.